There you go. Share your screen. It looks like it.
Welcome, everybody. Today I'm going to be talking about RequireJS. Anybody use it yet? Yeah? A lot of people used it, familiar with it. Hopefully learn you something. Okay, so for those of you that don't know, it's a JavaScript file and module loader. Optimized for in-browser use. Could be used in any other JavaScript environments. They name Rhino and Node here. And using a modular script loader like RequireJS will improve the speed and quality of your code. So what's a module? It's just a fancy way to say that you're encapsulating a piece of code into a useful unit. Here are a couple different kinds of modules. CommonJS, which is what Node uses itself. AMD is a asynchronous module definition. It's an API meant for asynchronous queries. Self-invoking functions, you've probably seen those a lot in JavaScript. And then there are more that I didn't feel like listing here. CommonJS API. This is a brief explanation of what it is. I'm just going to read this off to you, or you can read it yourself. The CommonJS API will fill that gap by defining APIs that handle many common application needs, ultimately providing a standard library as rich as those of Python, Ruby, and Java. The intention is that an application developer will be able to write an application using the CommonJS APIs and then run that application across different JavaScript interpreters and host environments. You can write, using CommonJS, you can write server-side JavaScript applications, command line tools, desktops, hybrid applications. There's a link here to learn a little more about it if you want to. And then here's just a quick little code snippet of what it looks like. The beginning of one would look like. It's just pulling in jQuery to be used inside of that my example function. Then the original list participants wanted to find a module format that worked with today's JavaScript languages, but wasn't bound by the browser environment. So they were looking for everything but, browser. Also, one main fallback is it's only allowed one module per file. Transport format would be used for bundling more than one module, and optimizing and bundling. The asynchronous module definition defines a mechanism, specifies a mechanism for defining modules such that the module and its dependencies can be asynchronously loaded. Anybody know why that would be good? Good job, yeah. You win a prize.
You can load in different orders.
Yes, the orders do not matter. Suited well for browser environments. You're not going to lock anything up while modules are loading. They can all load in different orders. Here's just a quick look at an AMD module where the define and then inside the array block is what we want, what we need to use, and then the function passes it in to be returned from that inner function. And RequireJS uses the asynchronous module definition API for all of its JavaScript modules. Here's an explanation of why they decided to use the AMD. It basically comes around from wanting a better way than just including all your scripts in the HTML and making sure they're in the proper order so that they're loaded properly on one, basically, the dependencies you're you are in charge of tracking those dependencies on that HTML page. And they next, it's an improvement over those global scripts and tags, globals and scripts tags, because it uses the common JS practice of string IDs for dependencies. IDs can be mapped to different paths, so you can swap out implementations. Encapsulates the definition, the module definition, gives you tools to avoid polluting the global namespace, which can be a problem with JavaScript. And a clear path to defining the module value, either use return value or the CommonJS exports, which if you've used CommonJS, you know that they tend to use the export a lot. And you return that export object. Why is it a little better over CommonJS? Well, it works better with the browser. Also, your cross-domain and CDN usage, it's easier to use because you're making asynchronous calls. You're not linked to the same domain as you would be. And you can include multiple modules in one file, which is a good thing. And you can actually set the function as the return value for constructor functions. Another one was just the plain out JavaScript module pattern, which is just the self-invoking function with the values inside. This was, brought about to keep from polluting the global namespace. Generally, you're passing in things from the global namespace as well, if you need anything from the outside scope. And AMD is an improvement over this as well, because it registers the factory function by calling a define instead of immediately executing. So it's not loaded and immediately executed, much like this self-invoking would be. And then another good point to know is that it only executes the factory function once all the dependencies have been loaded and executed. So you're guaranteed that all your dependencies are in place before you actually act upon them. RequireJS was designed to meet these following requirements. They wanted to load code before and after a page load. They wanted the scripts to be able to specify dependencies. They wanted the loader to be able to load nested dependencies. Scripts can be evaluated out of order, but the module needs to be evaluated according to dependencies. Format should be compact. Streamlined core loader, but allow for future. Allow modules to keep a clean global namespace. Load any script, and allow for performance upgrades. This is an example of the old school globals and script tags, where you're pulling in those generally, and you have to keep track of those and adding more as you need more. Once it's been RequireJS-ified, this would be your only script tag that you need. And I'll show you what the inside of that data main JS config looks like in the demo. It defines everything that RequireJS needs. And then after it's been optimized, it's even better. I'll show you that. That's a really cool feature. We've noticed we've changed the data main to one script file, to a different script file, and that's actually been compiled by r.js, which is the Require optimizer. And I'll show you a bit of how that works as well. Right now, it's demo time, so I'm going to switch over to command line mode. Give you a quick layout. This is just the base. I've chosen to use Bower to just bring in the JavaScript components. If you want, we can take a quick look at the Bower JSON file, which is just saying that we need r.js. R.js comes with require in it, the current version of RequireJS _ modernizer jQuery, and then just normalize CSS just to make everything a fair playing ground on all browsers for style. The config that I promised to show you is here. This is how we're telling require config to load how everything's going to be configured. What base URL, where the application is, and that is from the root of the page where the required script tag is loaded is the base. So we're saying from the root, go to the JS folder here. And then the paths to the plugins, I'm going back to where they live in the dependencies folder. I'm just telling it, RequireJS, you don't need to include the .js on the file names. It was meant to load JavaScript, so a naming convention that all JavaScript files end with .js. They expect you to follow that. And then the shim here is for when you want to define it as a dependency, and you'd rather include the jQuery as a $sign or underscore as the actual underscore. Is a way to define that. That's also where you can define dependencies for individuals. Modules. The shims are meant to be used for dependencies that do not follow the AMD API. So they're going to be generally, polluting the global namespace and just using things like that.
Your paths, are those relative paths to the JS base URL?
Yes, they are.
Is there let's say one of those was a CDN path, is there a fallback mechanism that would fall back to the local path as well?
There is. I'm not showing that here, but there is a way to do that. You would basically load a module, and in that module you would check for the existence of the CDN. If the CDN's not there, then you could fall back to the local version. Unfortunately, I don't have an example of that.
I thought you were able to define a CDN path by passing it into the paths.
Yes, you can, but then the other way that they mention it to make it a little safer, so that if the CDN is down and you can't reach it,
Gotcha.
to make a fallback to an actual downloaded version. This require here is saying that we need modernizer and the app home. So from the JS, the app, the home module, and the modernizer here, we need modernizer to run.
So if we were on Andres.com and you're telling it that our base URL is JS, I'm just a little confused about the relative paths because you've got going back to directories here, and I'm just thinking if I go back one from JS, then I'm on Andres.com, then where do I go back from there for my second backwards?
One is pointing to the local file system, and one is informing what the base URL when it generates the URL to request the assets to your web server. So rather than all of your modules requesting JS/feature/script name, it's going to assume that JS is part of that URL because your base is JS.
Right. I understand that. But the paths aren't relative to the base URL.
It's just where the actual existence is. When the query is made, it's going to lop this off, and you'll see that it actually just looks for Andres.com, as in your example, /Bower components. So it's not actually going to traverse backwards.
Okay.
And this was just because I was using Bower. You may do this differently when you deploy. So next we're going to take a look at this app home. An app home, we've surrounded it in the self-invoking just to add more safety around keeping it out of the global namespace. So define, we're saying that this module needs jQuery and underscore. And then I've just thrown in some dummy code to use the actual jQuery and underscore to prove that they're actually passed in and used. We're just going to wait for jQuery and underscore to be loaded. And once they're loaded, we're going to find my name and append my name to the span with the ID of replace me. So very simple. It's just there to do that. So if we come to our application here, we've already got it loaded, but I'll go ahead and reload it so you can see these dependencies loaded. You can see it pulls in RequireJS first, and then it loads our config, and then Modernizer, because I told it Modernizer before the app home. Home's loaded. Home needs require and jQuery is here, and here's the on the rest.
It looks like Modernizer and Home were loaded at the same time. And then
Yes, they were.
loaded at the same time.
Yes, they're done
Get that async.
asynchronously, and as you can see here in the head, if you can see that, I'm not sure if I can up the font in that part. You'll notice that these were loaded asynchronously. The tags are different. Here's your async right here, which is letting you know that those are ordered differently. Those are require appends those in the order that they need to be to the head tag, and then they're loaded asynchronously.
Is there a potential disadvantage to loading scripts asynchronously like that?
Yes, you actually could have something that requires another, and you don't have the dependency. Your script tag is not quite ready yet. The dependencies tree is supposed to take care of that and your defines. But there's also the problem where if you notice, if you watch on the rest here, when I first load it, it's not there and it flashes. That's because asynchronously, technically, the index page is there and ready. The requirements are not loaded, so the page is actually flashing that. There's workarounds for that to not display the page until everything is ready. There's some required documents, RequireJS plugins that make that a little easier and better. But right now I just left it like that. Also, I have an example of this the old school way, which is it's just the way you would have done it a while ago, where everything is defined by you and inline. And in this particular example, you don't notice much improvement between that and then RequireJS. It's just a simple example.
Can you go back to the?
Yes. All right, so now that that's done, RequireJS has this wonderful feature of optimization. And to do that, you need the r.js, which is a node module. Once again, we're just setting up this. This is a different configuration. This is for the r.js. And what this does is once again, it defines a base URL. So we're going to call this from back one directory where we called where this file actually lives. This is relative to where the file is at. From there, we tell it where our dependencies are, how we want things to be exported, the name of the file that we want to optimize, and then where we want the out file to happen. And the build is just going to be running the r.js and passing in the option of the build.js. And what that's going to do is it's going to build the home.build, which actually I'm not going to be able to read this very well. It includes all of those modules that we've defined in the config in the proper order, and they are all brought in one single JavaScript file.
That includes jQuery.
Includes jQuery. Modernizer.
Opt out of that?
Yes, there is. It's a different configuration setting that you've done. On your build configuration, you would set that up differently. But everything is inlined one and minimized and obfuscated, uglified, as you can see. And then we go to the build. As you notice, we only pulled the require and then our home built, which is everything included into one.
Can you go back and forth?
Yep. As you can see, it's home to be completely loaded and ready is just under 70 milliseconds. And built appears to be just under 50, which is, not too much, but is a valid improvement.
Well, I guess better.
Exactly. And also, if you notice the script, and once again, we're only in the one home build. Okay, that was the demo. Thank you. Tip your waitress. And these are references to read a lot more. There's so much that RequireJS can do that I didn't cover. And the CommonJS and AMD APIs are really cool. They let you do some powerful things.
So can you define your modules with CommonJS, or would you always do it with AMD and require CommonJS?
There are some libraries that actually combine the two that can make it possible to load the CommonJS into RequireJS. There's also a recommended wrapper that they offer in their documentation about how to include the CommonJS into.
So that way you can still use other libraries that might be using
Yes.
CommonJS.
Anybody got any questions? Any more comments?
That's good.
Most of the time, well, I guess it depends on it depends, but a lot of times people use one single JavaScript file for their whole site, right? So often you won't want to opt out of including jQuery.
I've read a lot that you wouldn't want to include jQuery because normally you would try to dereference jQuery from a CDN.
From a CDN.
That's going to be cached because it's used on on so many other sites that you can most likely have it already be cached by the browser. If you're using the same Google CDN URL that other sites are using.
That's a valid. I hadn't thought of that angle, where it may already be